Welcome to the Table Leadership Podcast, where everyone is invited to pull up a seat, and all leaders have a voice to contribute to the conversation. We're glad you could join us today. And now, your host, Cyon Edgerton.
It's so hard to be women out here.
No,
can't even wear your good earrings. I know. I used to have that problem when I preached. They'd be like, "Cyon, your earrings are hitting the microphone again." I'm like, well, you know what? I'm just trying to look fly and bring the word of God. Okay. So we got to figure this out. Give me a handheld. Okay. Anyways, I digress. All right. Well, we'll jump in then. So welcome everyone who's listening today. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Table Leadership Podcast. I am super excited to be here with a dear friend of mine. We met through another mutual friend and mentor, Joe Saxton, years ago, and have just remained in contact. A number of us women have been friends for a long time, and I'm so excited to feature her voice. She is actually down kind of in like mid to Southern California, and so we were so excited. We were just talking about how awesome it is that I have finally moved to the West Coast. We still have yet to connect and see each other in person, but hopefully when the world opens back up again, that will be happening sooner rather than later. So super excited to introduce my friend Grace to you. So Grace, why don't you kick us off by just telling us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, all that good stuff.
Thank you, Cyon. Thank you for having me. Hi, everybody on the podcast who's listening. A little bit about who I am. I am a writer. I work as an editor as well. I love both things. I think both are strengths of mine, and it's been really fun to see how my editing has used skills from my pastoring days. So I used to be an associate pastor for 7 years, and then I felt like God was pulling me out of ministry life and then into this writing world, and that has been a journey, one I didn't expect to be on, but here I am writing and editing. I used to say I was the wife of a chef because that meant so much to me. It meant that we lived a very different kind of life. It meant that our lives revolved around food. But my husband, who was a chef, is now a software engineer. And so I can't quite say that anymore. And it doesn't sound as cool or fun, but it has been a gift, particularly because of everything that's been happening right now with COVID and how that has changed the landscape of the restaurant industry. And we feel very humbled by how God has led our lives the way he did in this last year. So that's a little bit of who I am. I'm also a mother of two school-age kids, and they are currently hiding in the living room as we're speaking.
That's great. Yeah, this is what it's like recording podcasts in the pandemic. Is my kids may or may not come screaming through the room at any moment, but it's all good. This is real. And so, I didn't even think about this when I first asked you to be a guest. Because as you know, one of the questions that I always ask everybody, just for fun as an icebreaker, is if we were gathered together, around a live actual table instead of a virtual one, and we had got some people together to pour into them and invest in them, what would you be feeding us? And I completely forgot your husband was a chef, and so maybe he would be feeding us, or maybe you would. I don't know.
I can cook too.
You can cook. I've been seeing a lot of bread making happening on your Instagram recently, which is very exciting to me. So if we were gathered together live instead of virtual, what would you be serving us?
There are so many things I wish I can serve you. So if we weren't in a pandemic and I wasn't making bread all the time, I'd probably cook you Korean food no matter what. I am Korean American, a second gen, meaning that my parents were the immigrants. That's who we call the first gen. And so I've only recently started to appreciate and embrace my grandmother's way of cooking, or my mother-in-law's way of cooking, or my mother's way of cooking, and really not being taught by my grandmother or my mother, but really being taught by my mother-in-law, because we live with my in-laws, and how that has really shaped my cultural identity, and has allowed me to have more stories about maybe not my heritage or my family, but of the Korean culture or Korean heritage that I have gained, maybe not verbally through my parents, but through my in-laws. And so that has been really good. And so I probably would make you some Korean food, probably some sort of barbecued meat, or there's something called bibimbap, which is like a mixed rice. And it has veggies in it, roasted veggies, some fresh veggies, and then some sort of meat. And then you put an egg, like a fried egg on top, and you mix it all up. And that's what bibimbap means. It means mixed. And so I feel like that's like a crowd pleaser. Everyone loves that one. It's healthy. It's over rice, so it's satisfying for so many people. But right now, I really like making bread. So probably make you some bread. And my other thing I like to, I want to try making is like a butternut squash soup, or a kabocha squash soup. That's what started my whole bread making. And so I'd probably make that as well.
Yum.
You probably have to stay at my house, and then so I could feed you multiple times.
I would totally be okay with that. If that is an open invitation, that is one that I will take you up on. That's awesome. So aside from the food stuff, which sounded amazing, and now I'm going to go off into left field a little bit, because you just said something that I think was super critical. I want to ask you to talk about it a little bit. And I know this wasn't really part of our planned conversation, but you mentioned in just learning to cook from your mother-in-law and some from your mom and grandma. You mentioned your cultural identity, coming to terms with and embracing your cultural identity more. And I think that is, it's just a beautiful picture. And I think a lot of us don't always take that journey for a number of different reasons. But can you just talk a little bit about what you mean by that, embracing your cultural identity and the journey of that, and just the importance of that for all of us as individuals?
Right. Maybe I'll start with the fact that I actually hated being Korean, or I hated my Koreanness. I don't think I had the words to say I wanted to be white when I was feeling these things, but particularly when I was in high school. I grew up overseas. My parents are missionaries, so when I came back my junior year of high school to California, that was probably the first time I felt very othered or less than. I think less than is a better word. I felt less than even the other Asian Americans, or even the other specifically second-gen Korean Americans, because I didn't act like them. I didn't dress like them. I didn't talk like them. And so I wanted to do what I think the gut longing for belonging was, I just want to be normal. And I don't think I could have named it back then, but really normal meant being accepted, being pretty, or in other words, looking or being white and acting. And so I looked at kids who had made it and who had white friends, and I just thought, like, that's the goal, is they must have done something. They must be cool enough, or they must have something within them that made them attractive to the majority culture. And so that really started my hatred toward my own Koreanness. So it took lots of years of feeling that, and then recognizing, oh my goodness, I have worth. Oh my goodness, I was made this way, and it wasn't by mistake, and that it wasn't a curse. Like the fact that I'm not white in a predominantly white culture here in the States. And even though Southern California is is more diverse, I think, than lots of different areas of the country, still I felt like I was less than. So my journey back into my Koreanness started with, there's another writer whose name is Shannon Martin, and she has 2 adopted Korean kids. And the older one had written me a card once, a thank you card. And he had signed his name, his Korean name. And I broke. Something about seeing his name signed in his Korean name made me think he values his Koreanness way more than I was embarrassed of my Korean name. I was embarrassed and ashamed of my Korean culture. And he was so proud to be Korean. And I thought, I have so much access to Koreanness all around me, and yet I reject it whereas he might not have all the resources around him, but he is so proud to be Korean. And that started the breaking of my hatred toward my Koreanness. And then the Black Lives Matter movement that happened, recognizing, yes, of course, the African American community has worth. Of course, they're made in the image of God, and recognizing my own racism and prejudice against them that I grew up with, that I had in my heart, and breaking that down, and recognizing, oh my goodness, if they have worth, then somehow I think I had seen white and Black as American, but anything other than that is not. And anything other than that then is a foreigner, which I think that's the narrative that we've seen and heard a lot.
Yeah.
And so that all of that together, and they came kind of, maybe not back to back, but year after year, I feel like God was doing a breaking down of my rejection of myself, and then building that back up. And after that, we went on a trip to Korea. That was the first time I'd gone with my kids. And it was the first time I didn't go with my parents. So it was really where I was playing the parent role without having to do all the family obligation stuff, which usually made it difficult, I think, to appreciate Korean culture when I was there. But it helped me to see the good things about my culture, helped me to understand more of our history and how we were people who were oppressed and still overcame and still became our own people and still contained our identity through that, or retained or preserved our identity. And that excited me for what that means to be Korean then. And I think my journey into really embracing my culture was through stories, and stories often come through food and through cooking. And so that has been a whole journey of where I am now, where I'm more excited to even learn and understand more of the language. Or I used to reject very strongly any K-pop, K-drama, like Korean dramas, Korean pop music. I just was like, that is not of me. And I'm not going to listen to that. I'm not going to watch that because that's not me. But even that has turned around. Not that I listen to K-pop, but there are so many Korean dramas on Netflix right now. And realizing that hearing the language, even though I may not understand it 100%, hearing it is still soothing for my soul and still feeds my soul. So there's so much of that. Like a lot of us who, whether you're of a minority culture or majority culture, we don't want to embrace who we are because for various reasons, where maybe we have so many, our parents are from way back and it's mixed and we don't know exactly our history, but there's that importance of knowing our history and therefore knowing our culture and how that shapes and forms who we are and how we miss something when we don't look into those things.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I'll never forget the time that Chantel, another mutual friend of ours, who I hope to have on the podcast soon,
Yes.
We were having this conversation regarding race and ethnicity and things like that. And she was talking about this very thing that you're sharing with us now about the cultural journey. And I remember her even asking me about my cultural journey. And my response was something along the lines of, well, do I have a cultural journey? I don't know. Like, I'm just white. I don't know. I'm just American. And she really encouraged me to embark on discovering and uncovering my own, ethnic background and my own, cultural history. And so it's funny, actually, my husband and I, we both did ancestry.com. Oh. And so we did the whole DNA, thing and kind of figured out like, where do our people come from? And it really was beautiful. And to then figure out and to begin looking at some of the histories and the stories. And so I think there's so much, obviously it's important for all of us. But I love some of the things that you brought up about just, some of the struggles with assimilation and the feelings that you had about your own journey. And I love the way that you shared that with us. That was super, super valuable and beautiful. And I know it was way off script. So thank you for letting me put you on the spot a little bit. I hope that's okay. So back to the question that I was going to ask you about. Nope. Actually, nope. I want to stick on this for a minute. Sorry. I'm trying to get back on track and I just don't think we're supposed to be. So for anyone who's listening, I guess I just want to ask what advice you would give, if it's even possible to do that. I know everyone's journey is going to be different and
Right.
it's going to be their own, but for someone who's listening, who really is just resonating with what you're saying, who feels like, gosh, I have not actually really taken my own cultural journey yet and discovered what my own ethnic history and culture has looked like. And that sounds amazing to me. You know, I don't want to try to assimilate with any other culture. I actually want to be who I was created to be. And I know that that's a difficult journey. It's not an easy one to make, but what advice would you give, or what recommendations might you make to someone who's really feeling prompted to embark on that journey, but doesn't really know where to start?
I'm not an expert. Clearly I'm on this journey myself. But I'll tell you what I did. I read stories, and I don't think that's just because I'm a writer and that I'm in this world, but because stories contain more than just facts. I used to I feel like I'm using the word hate a lot. I really did not like history in school because it felt boring to me, and it felt like we have to memorize. We're not memorizing things that really happened, because we're just memorizing numbers and places and events, versus stories, which have people and their lives and all of that, the feelings of what it was to be human at the time. And so for me, there was a series of books that my husband had read in junior high. I don't know why he had picked it up, but he had read it during one of his free reading times. And he was telling me that a lot of the things that he retained in terms of our Korean history was from those books. And so I was so curious when I started this journey, even though they were written for children, I'm sure it would still have an impact now. So now I'm blanking on the title of the book, but there were 3 books in that series, and she was about the same age as my grandmother, who had passed away 2 years ago. And I thought, even though she's not my grandmother, she lived during the same time as her. And so I'm sure the experiences were maybe not the same, but similar when they had gone through the war. And the author had immigrated here to the States in her 20s. So even seeing both the story of my grandmother, but then also maybe the story of my parents and even me, the whole assimilating and she went through that. She did a little bit of that, and yet she could tell not that she holds everything, but she told the span of the story of my grandmother to my parents and then to me. And so I was so impacted by her stories, and I ended up emailing because this is who I am, Cyon. I end up stalking people and say, just to be like, I need to make a connection. You have made such an impact on my life. And so I found her and just thanked her for writing the books, because it gave me some sort of ground to stand on, to say, like, this is my story too. I know we're not blood related, but somehow, because you're of my people, this is my story too. And maybe that's what we all need to read, is more stories of those of the people who came before us, or if we have multiple ethnicities in us, then even to go back and see and read stories, or I even thought like folklore is important. I never appreciated that, but I'm wondering how much of that actually impacted and formed and shaped our cultural identity of what was passed down. So I would think stories are really important. And because I'm not a history buff and I don't like those kinds of books, I would read novels, or I would read biographies. I think those create a deeper and more colorful picture of where we're from.
That's so good. Thank you.
Also, can I just add food again? Like, when we know
no matter what we're talking about, can we just add food as the answer?
Basically, because if you not only do you get a visual, let's say you're reading something, you get the visual or a movie picture of what it might have been like. But when you eat the food, then it gives an even more rounded picture, because not only do you taste the food, you smell the food, you hear the food, all of that gives a holistic experience of who we are, of our culture.
Yeah, that's awesome. Every time I started this a while ago, every time we travel to a new country, and I'm not a big, like trinket person, but cookbooks. Every time we travel, I get a cookbook from wherever we visited, because like you said, the cultural experience and the history and the food, like it's all intertwined. And so that's one of my favorite things to do every weekend, is to make something different from one of these cookbooks. This weekend, I'm going to be making a bunny chow, a South African bunny chow. Which does not actually have rabbit in it. It's a vegetarian, lentil-based South African bunny chow. But anyways, yeah. And there's this like South African fried bread recipe. So very excited to immerse ourselves in that experience this weekend. So yes, it does come back to food. So thanks for letting me go off on a tangent.
Yes.
I have a tendency to do that. So anyways, let's talk. And obviously everything that you just said right there was leadership all the way, just our identity and knowing who we are. But what else do you feel like you bring to the leadership table in this season?
When I first saw this question, I wondered, what do I bring right now? I'm in a season where I'm mothering. I'm in this pandemic trying to school my children as well, while also working as a work-at-home mom. And I'm not in any roles. Like, I don't have a position right now where I'm getting paid to lead people. But so what do I bring to the table? I do lead. We all lead in some capacity. Someone is always looking up to us, and we are making impact, and we are influencing people wherever we're at. And so knowing that, I think what I bring right now, and what I have a group of girls I meet with, I've met with for the past 2 to 3 years. And we talk about what does it mean to be healthy holistically in every sense of our being. And so as we were talking, I was thinking maybe some sort of self-awareness of how to be healthy, or how to be more in tune with ourselves. And that goes back to our cultural identity conversation we just had. But I think that is something a lot of leaders maybe put to the side, because other things are more pertinent, like how to, lead this certain type of group, or how to run this type of program, or how do we do our best to lead in this pandemic, like we were talking about. But when it comes back to themselves, and if they were just in their room, it would be how are you doing, and are you healthy? And those are questions I think we often avoid because we don't know how to answer them. So
yeah,
I'm going to
absolutely.
say, self-awareness is a strength. Is a strength that we can bring to the table, that I can bring to the table.
Yeah, that's good. And I think you're so right. You absolutely just hit the nail on the head, because there's obviously all of the external, practical, technical aspects of leadership that we like to talk about all the time. But, Joe always reminds us that we lead from the inside out. Right. And so what's inside and what's going on inside really matters. The one question when I talk to my spiritual director, the one question he always starts with is, so how's your soul? And that one always just gets me. I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know. How is my soul right now? It's like the most, impactful question anyone's ever asked me. And so when you talk about this idea of having a level of self-awareness and approaching how we're doing holistically, break that down for me. Are you kind of like running the gamut of physical, emotional, spiritual, mental, kind of all of these things? And then how do you practice health and wholeness and self-awareness? What are some of the things that you yourself would walk us through if you were kind of leading us to a place of health and wholeness?
Right. To answer the first part, yes, we talk about the whole gamut of things. And I think things changed as our lives have changed over the years. And we took maybe a whole year to talk about every little aspect, like relationally. We could talk about friendships, we could talk about our families, marriage, and whatnot. So yes to all the holistic stuff, but also at the end of it, it's funny because I just asked someone this morning, how's your soul? I'm not a spiritual director, but I know that has been such an impactful and centering question for me. And so I often ask it to other people as well. And maybe that's a question we all need to ask ourselves every once in a while, is how's my soul? And then I think of how David would talk to himself and his soul, and maybe that's part of what it is how is our soul doing, and recognizing, taking the time to pause and really know how our soul is doing. So that is definitely a question I ask myself and others. The biggest thing that has helped me recently, and maybe you've talked about it with your other guests, is the Enneagram.
Oh, no, actually, this has come up. It's come up a couple times kind of in passing, like, oh yeah, I'm a 1, I'm a 3, whatever, but we've never actually had someone that could dive into it. So I would love for you to talk about that.
Well, let's dive into it as much as I know how to.
Great.
So I'm a 2, wing 3 on the Enneagram, which a 2 is a helper. And for those of you who do know the Enneagram or don't, every number, when you're in stress or in unhealth, you go to a different kind of number, and you have the characteristics of the negative side, I guess, of that number. And then if you're in health, or if you're not stressed, then you can go to a different number. So for me, when I'm unhealthy, I go to an 8. And when I'm healthy, I go to a 4. And there are aspects, I think, when I'm healthy in leadership, it looks very much like an 8. And I think it's still a strength. And I still think I'm in health. But a lot of times for right now, my weakness, and maybe others will see it as a strength, but I can't not see the needs of others. Mm-hmm. So if I see someone's eyes, I will most likely try to figure out what's going on, what's happening right now, what's your story, which is why I like people watching, and I try to figure out everyone's stories. But I cannot help but see that. And so that works against me, mm-hmm. because the other side of me wants to meet all those needs. And that leads to burnout usually, or that leads to resentment. And so I've used the Enneagram as a way to kind of like bumpers for like the bowling alley or whatever. Mm-hmm. If I see myself going a certain way, I check myself, like, is that a characteristic of my healthy self, or is that a characteristic of this number that I go to in unhealth? And the question that's really hard for me is, what are my needs? What would it look like for me to take care of myself? So yesterday was actually a really bad day in mothering, and just in my mental health. I felt very depressed. And so I really had to take a pause at the end of the day and say, like, what do I really need right now? If I were not thinking of what my family needs, what my in-laws need, what the world needs right now, what do I need? And it was really, I need some alone time, and I need to take a long shower so no one can bother me. And after that, I felt better. And so I've used the Enneagram in that way. I don't know all the ins and outs of it. But those 2 bumpers have helped me stay in the lane of what is really healthy for my number. Or the 2 other numbers, like an 8 and a 4, has helped me stay in my 2-ness, and help me see like what is healthy and what is not. Because there are aspects of being a helper that are good, of course, right? And I think because people praise that, right? Like, especially in the church or in the world, good do-gooders are looked up to, like a Mr. Rogers type. And I think that can work against me, mm-hmm. because I want to be seen as that, of course. But then when I do too much and I don't care for myself, then most likely the people who suffer the most are not only me, but the people who are right around me, who see the real me, and who see every part of me, the real me being every part of me, because mm-hmm. it's not like it's not that I'm a different person on the outside when I'm doing good things. It's just that that's not the whole of me. So that's what I've been using to measure my health and unhealth.
Yeah. That's such a powerful tool. And I'm kind of with you. I've read a lot of the books and I've studied it for a while. I'm definitely not an expert by any means, but I have personally found it, I think out of all the different profiles and things that exist out there, to be the most helpful and beneficial for me, because I think it's been the most revealing, mm-hmm. and the most spot on, because like you said, there's kind of your core your core profile, your core number, but then you can also see, all right, what happens to me under stress and what happens when I'm healthy. And so the interaction of all of those different aspects has been so helpful. I'm a 1, which
Okay.
and I've had 2 different Enneagram professionals walk me through the process. One of them said I was a 1, one of them said I was a 3. So I don't know.
I think you were a 3.
I think I kind of go like back and forth. I'm not really sure. I know my wing is a 2. But so the 3 is the achiever, and then the 1, depending on, I've seen it multiple ways, and I don't know what you know it as, Grace, but I've seen the 1 as perfectionist, and then I've also seen it titled as the reformer, which
Yes.
I like the reformer better because the perfectionist just has such a negative connotation to it. But yeah, that absolutely has kind of been the journey of my life and leadership, and just how much I've had to release and let go of and heal from in order to actually walk in the fullness and the wholeness and the healthy version of who God created me to be, and what my leadership should even look like when I'm not stumbling into all these pitfalls of my wiring and my lack of identity. So yeah, I think the Enneagram is such a helpful tool. For anyone who's curious to learn more, I know for me, probably the most helpful book was The Road Back to You, Ian Morgan-Cron. Is there another one that you would recommend, Grace?
No, but I've listened to all the podcasts that has been helpful. Just to hear someone of a different number talk about what it looks like for them, that's been helpful to, especially in our marriage. I'm married to a 5. And so our dynamics are very different. The way we think is very different. So I think hearing the interviews have been more helpful for me because then I get 2 different perspectives. And then not only, what is a 2 like, what is a 5 like, but the interaction, what's the conversations like? Because that was revealing too.
Yeah, that's so funny because my husband is also a 5.
Oh,
and so you and I we're close on our numbers, and I did not know that your husband was a 5. So we might need to have some more conversations offline about this interaction. You probably have a lot of wisdom to share. So let me ask you this, because I know you have such a pastoral heart. I was actually just thinking, I was telling someone earlier that, I was going to have you on, and I was talking about your voice. You and Kim Whetstone, another mutual friend of ours, who I had on as a guest not too long ago, a few weeks ago. And it's just so soothing listening to her, isn't it? She's got such a pastoral heart. And I always say, like, I feel like a chihuahua when I'm around her, like just and all high energy and everything. And Kim is just like, she is like shalom embodied. And I feel the same way when I talk to you. You have such this soothing voice and just such this pastoral heart and just softness and steadiness and slowness. Like it's very regal. And again, like I'm the chihuahua in the room, but it's fine because that's how God made me and I'm learning to embrace that. But what I want to ask you as we wrap up is this, especially considering where we are right now. People are just trying to figure out how to lead. I mean, the world is obviously in upheaval. Things are changing quicker than we can keep up with them. Obviously, I'm having this conversation with people that things aren't going to go back to normal. It's going to be a new normal that we're going to have to adjust and adapt to and figure out how to lead in. And then, of course, in the midst of all of it, people are they're in the midst of grief and loss, and kids are home from school and they're still trying to figure out how to homeschool their kids and keep working and all these different things. I think there's so much opportunity right now in this season, especially because we're in the midst of a pandemic, for there to be a lot of unhealth and a lot of unrest and a lot of feeling of, oh my gosh, I have to figure this out. I have to keep it together. I have to care for my community. I mean, talk about feeling the burden of meeting the needs of others. My gosh, they are so great right now. And I think someone who recognizes their leadership, who recognizes that they do have impact and influence over other people, really carries that burden on them. So what I want to ask you is, how would you pastor someone right now in that place? What are some of the things that you would recommend to them? If you could give, just a couple, like, quick and easy, practical application. If someone is saying, yeah, you know what, I really need to check the state of my soul. What would you advise? How would you walk them through that? What are some of the things that they can do to actually look inward and assess the state of their own soul, especially right now in this time? And then how would you then advise for them to move after assessing the state of their soul, however we do that? Then what do we do with that based on how I am truly, really, actually doing? How do I grow my self-awareness and also my self-care in a time when our inner health and wholeness is really critical if we're going to continue to lead well?
Right. I resonate so strongly with, it's not going to be the same as it was. And, initially when all this started happening or when it became more of a concern, this pandemic, we were all concerned for people's physical health, and we still are. And then I thought the longer we go, I started worrying and being concerned for people whose mental health.
Yes.
I struggled with depression, and knowing the state of my mind and how fragile I was, particularly when I was in my darkest places and when I had a lot of suicidal ideations, and how when the whole world feels overwhelming and there are no solutions right now, and we can only do so much to control other people and their behaviors. I thought that's a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe for a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, a lot of maybe new cases or new experiences of that, that people may not have experienced because they just didn't have the time to stop. Or now life has forced us to stop, for many of us. And for some, it has kept going, and that's fine. But one thing I've done for myself is centering prayer and deep breathing. So I've had to, at the end of every night, almost, I've had to lay in my bed or lay on the floor and just take deep breaths. I usually do about 3 to 5. And generally for me, I don't know if it's like this for you, but at the end of the day, I'm running through like all the things that could have been done, should have been done, not just in my family, but right now, like in the world, did I do enough for the justice of others? And did I, use my voice well enough? Did I write enough? And I just have to take a moment and recognize what I did do or didn't do, not to dismiss. I'm not dismissing anything, right? Like, I'm not saying like, you did that, it was great, but you didn't do this. Or I'm not saying you didn't do this, you totally should have done this, and tomorrow you should do better. And then just kind of sitting in the silence afterwards. But to kind of just see it, look at it in its face, all the things I did and didn't do, and just to say that was what I did.
Yeah.
And to sit there and say like, this is who I am. This is what I did, and just let that be for a couple seconds, as I do deep breaths. And I started doing, I don't know if you know square breathing. I forget where I first saw it, maybe from Brene Brown. But it was just 4 seconds of breathing, in, and you breathe in for 4 seconds. You hold it for 4 seconds. You breathe out for 4 seconds, and then you hold it again for 4 seconds. So it allowed me to, I think, because even for deep breathing, you can totally take deep breaths and it's not calming you down. It's actually ramping you up. But the square breathing has forced me to elongate my deep breaths, and take the time to do that. So I do square breathing or deep breathing. And then centering prayer. If there's things I like, the state of the world, and there's not much I can do maybe from my home or with my resources.
Yeah.
And I just pray, Lord, have mercy. God, have mercy. Lord, have mercy. Particularly when I feel like there's nothing, I have no control over this, or I wish I could support this family with all that I have, but I can't, or I don't have the means to do that. And so, Lord, have mercy, and crying out to God and remembering how the Israelites cried out to him, when they were desperate, and that God met them, that God came and delivered and rescued. And so I'm holding on and banking on the fact that even though I can't do everything, that God, you can do everything. You have all the riches of the world and then some in your hands. And so you can meet this family. You can meet them in their mourning or in their weeping over things that they also can't control. So that's one thing. That's a way to center myself. And then in terms of taking care of myself, I think that's so individualized, right? Like for me, self-care looks like taking a moment like in the shower. Please do not interrupt mommy when I'm taking a shower, please. I'm going to lock the doors. And that's a form of self-care for me. And I think we've used actually luxury to care for ourselves when we talk about self-care. And in a time when we don't have access to that, like we can't go shopping, not that those are all self-care things, but I feel like this is what we normally tell ourselves, right? Like, I've had a hard week. I'm going to go do retail therapy. Or I've had a hard week and a really hard season. I need to go get a massage, which I highly recommend that if you can. And if you have the means to do that, I highly recommend massages because it's a very holistic type of healing that happens. However, all those things are closed right now. No one can access those things except what's in your home or what's right around you. So because we're limited, I think another thing to have holistic centering and holistic self-care is taking a walk outside. I feel like seeing green, I'm sure there's some sort of scientific thing behind this research, that looking at green things, particularly plant life or flowers, is very soothing for our souls. And maybe it's the combination of visual, smell, and even hearing the rustling of the leaves that after the hard day yesterday, I took a walk outside, and initially it was a very fast walk because I needed to get some anger out. And I started to slow down and take deep breaths, and I could hear the rustling because there was a slight, it feels like summer here, right? I don't know about you, we're in NorCal, but it feels like summer right now here.
Yeah, it's pretty gorgeous.
And it's pretty hot. And so in the evenings, it's perfect. And so there was that breeze and I could hear the leaves. I could hear lots of birds singing and chirping, and the smell of the blossoms, whether they're from the orange trees that are in our neighborhood or the flowers that are blooming beautifully, all of that calmed me. And so the third lap around the neighborhood was a slower one of recognizing like, okay, it was the day that it was. We have another try tomorrow. And we can, the hardness or the difficulty of today doesn't mark me and my identity, but it also doesn't mark what the rest of the week will look like, or mark my child for the things he did and didn't do, or she did and didn't do. It's a fresh slate every day. So those are the things that I've been doing in our quarantined and very minimalistic time. To make sure that I am caring for myself as someone who has a hard time remembering to care for myself while I'm holding the tensions and pain of the world. Yeah. I also want to add, of course, that was yesterday. The day before, I did numb out and I did Netflix. So knowing, like, I'm not sitting here, just deep breathing every day, but that when I'm aware enough, right? That's the thing. Even for me, even though that's my way of being, I'm very self-reflective and I want to draw others into that. There are days when I know I'm avoiding it purposely because I just don't want to deal with what I see, or I just don't want to even deal with facing my own feelings or my own shame or, my own anger. So I want to say that. And then I also want to say, I think as leaders, there's our self-care for sure, our soul care. And there's a distinction, of course, in those two things. But there's also the care for our team, or there's the care for our staff, or those that we lead, that we have influence over. I started doing deep breaths as a group in our in my mentoring group right before prayer. And I realized that all of us, as we're about to enter into praying, that we've allowed ourselves enough pause, enough space to say, oh yeah, I am entering into the presence of God. I'm already there, but I was so busy, I didn't recognize I'm here sitting in the presence of God, whatever I'm doing. And now particularly as we're entering into prayer. So that has been a practice I started implementing in the last year, of taking deep breaths together, and how that invites all of us to take a moment and create space, so that as a group, as a church, as a leadership team, we can have health in that group, right? Because there's health individually, and then there's the health of the team, health of the group. And I wonder if we miss out on some of that. I mean, we can do strategies for sure about the health of our team, but doing centering stuff too. That I think we usually think of that as an individualistic thing that we do in our homes or in our quote unquote prayer closets, which I don't like that term. It sounds very claustrophobic to me. So, but yeah, if we could do that all together, and how that invites us, I think that's kind of what praise does for me, or worship time. When we're singing songs, it's a communal act. We're doing it together, and we're all acknowledging something at the same time. And that has its own healing power to it. So I think I would recommend, not only for yourself as an individual leader, but particularly if you're leading a team, or even your family, or even your kids, taking that deep breaths together. I taught my kids the square breathing, because usually when I tell them or yell at them to take a deep breath, it doesn't really work. So we're practicing like the slow 4 count of breaths, so that all of us can come back to a place of sanity and love for one another. So
that's really, really good.
I would recommend,
Yeah, that's good. And I mean, like you said, we are the ones that are going to model for those that we're influencing what whole healthy leadership looks like. And it is a huge part of that is soul care, and the ability, like you said, to do that collectively is beautiful. I mean, how often was Jesus doing that with his disciples, in community collectively. And I think that's awesome. And I love the making space that you talked about, making space for all of this. That's there we go. Grace Cho, the ministry of making space. That's what we're going to title this. I love it. Well, awesome. This has been so incredibly helpful for me, and I'm sure that everyone listening found something to grab onto and something that resonated with them. And so I just want to thank you. I know these are kind of crazy times, but I feel like what you brought to us today was exactly what we needed to hear, and the timing is just going to be so perfect because of all the different things we could be doing to try to figure out how to lead right now. This is really at the core. This is the foundation. This is what it comes down to. So I just want to say thank you for living the life that you do and being who you are and being willing to take the time to come and share it with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Table Leadership Podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to the resources that were discussed at the table today and to connect with today's guest. Remember to subscribe to the Table Podcast and follow along on social media at The Table Leadership. Visit thetableleadership.com to learn more about current courses and coaching opportunities. And finally, you can connect with me, your host, at CyonEdgerton.com or on social media at CyonEdgerton. I look forward to the next time that you pull up a seat at the table.